The state find a way this session to really deal with infrastructure issues. As many people know, we have about a $6 billion backlog of projects right now. Traditionally, talking about the gas tax is the way to pay for this, and there's a lot of talk about that right now in Nashville, and we've been talking it a lot here locally as well. Do you think that is the solution, raising the gas tax?
I think it's going to take a lot of solutions. You know, when people say, well, you have a surplus budget, why don't you just use that? Well, when you talk about $6 billion, it's 6,000 million. So last year we gave like $254 million back to the TDOT fund. Well, then that only means we need another 5,750 million more until we're just caught up with the backlog projects. You know, these are things that we have the EPA has done their work, we own the land, we just need concrete and people on the ground. It's going to take multiple sources besides just the surplus, and we're just going to have to work on that this session to figure out what is best, you know, for that.
Senator Massey, I want to open this up to you as well. You and I had a discussion about this recently concerning the gas tax, and there's talks of possibly lowering other taxes to kind of offset this if this happens. What are your thoughts on this going forward?
Well, I think there is a lot of interest in potential, if there is an increase in the transportation infrastructure user fee, to offset it somewhat, and a lot of interest in potentially lowering the food tax. You know, like I say, I think, you know, in the past year or so there had been some proposals, but it was piecemealing things together. And I think that for something to pass, it's got to be a comprehensive plan, including, you know, the few cents, I think, you know, we're talking, I believe the thought is 7 or 8 cents a gallon, which would be equate to, you know, about $30 a year for an average driver. But it would increase the diesel fee, so it's more than the regular gas. And because our trucks are being used, you know, put extensive amount of wear on the roads, there would be potentially some kind of a fee for alternative fuel vehicles because they do use the roads. And, you know, and so it's going to be a multifaceted plan, I believe, that, and I think we'll see something, a proposal by the governor. I know a number of the House members have been meeting with the governor on some potential ideas and proposals there. So there's a lot of input. It's been almost 30 years since an increase has made. So technically we've had a tax decrease at the pump because we're all getting a lot more fuel efficient cars than we did in '89. One thing that I said the other night is that, you know, the one issue that people turn out more for than any other issue that comes before our state government is a road issue. And people want to keep their roads good. So somehow, some way, we've got to figure out that, you know, that what we're doing is the right thing, and the surplus is not going to take care of the roads. So,
Lieutenant Governor, I need to ask you, obviously, high-profile position, a lot of experience on the Finance Committee as well. Do you think this is the most pressing financial issue facing our state this session?
We have a lot of pressing financial issues. I'd certainly agree with Roger and Becky. In addition, a lot of, probably a larger portion of the gas tax and most taxes are paid by people that are traveling through Tennessee, since we're covered by 8 other states. And I think it needs to be a comprehensive plan, and it needs to be as low as possible, but still meet the needs, and certainly making it revenue neutral, counterbalance, and get some cuts in general fund taxation, I think.
All right, let's shift gears for a minute and talk a little bit about the Knox County Safety Center. I want to bring in Representative Smith. I know that you, along with Senator Massey, have been working to secure funding for this project. How likely do you think it is to secure that funding this session, and how are you going about convincing other lawmakers to get behind this?
You know, we recognize that we've got an issue with the mentally ill being put in jail right now. It's become a revolving door, and we're spending millions of dollars in Knox County just with that revolving door in the prison system. So trying to divert them and do something different is what we've got to look at. in talking with a lot of the colleagues, Knox County is farther ahead than most of the rest of our communities around the state in dealing with this issue and looking at alternatives. Back a few years ago, there was a temporary AOT law passed that was a pilot program. We're looking to expand that. So that's one level of this that we're looking at. The other part is we've done a request with the governor to include it in his budget. If that is not there, Senator Massey and I are already filing a bill doing a direct request through the Department of Mental Health at $1.5 million per year over 3 years, setting up a pilot, because if we can see over the next few years enough savings on the county level, they can step in. We can draw down some federal funds through the Cures Act that was just passed with the AOT law. And then the third segment of that is doing a budget amendment. If the first two don't work out, when we get near the end of session, do a budget amendment to try and secure the funds that way.
This kind of flows naturally into a question that we have here from the audience, and excuse me if I cannot read everyone's name here. This is about mental health, and the person writes, this is concerning the counselor bill, SB 001, I believe. I have serious concerns about the approval of the bill that would exempt counselors from serving persons seeking medical help for their mental illness. Who wants to address this issue? Dr. Briggs?
I think that card maybe addressed me directly. We had a bill last year, and let me summarize what it is that there is an association of therapists, and the state, rather than having their own rules and regulations on who can be licensed, uses the ethics, the standards that this organization does, since we don't have it, we don't have our own state. And this is done in other parts of medicine nationally also. We have a joint commission for the accreditation of hospitals, which really isn't a government agency, but the government uses that as their accrediting organization. And one of the new, in 2014, one of the new points that was added to this association's recommendations was that every counselor had to take care of any patient that showed up in his door. And what happened with this is that there were counselors, first of all, that said there may be people that come here that I don't feel comfortable treating. They can, be something that they just don't take care of. The second thing that came up, there may be people that want treatment for things that, and I think that what we put in our law, that I have principles that are contrary to my deeply held principles. And when I'm looking at this, I'm trying to look at this both philosophically and what's best for patients. And it was a very controversial bill. But I'm going to use, the best example I can give is me as a medical doctor. And but the first principle that I feel is that the government and the legislature should not be practicing medicine, telling professionals what they need to do and what they don't need to do. The second principle I have is that there are physicians and there are therapists that have deeply held principles that they don't agree with. And I'll give you a couple examples on the medical side, because this is what I can speak to the most. Going back to 1978, when I was first licensed as a physician, I don't believe that we should be giving people opiates for every problem that they come in with, particularly for chronic pain management. The government, starting in the early 90s, and this was the government, not an organization, in the early 90s, came in and said, you're not treating pain properly. This Joint Commission for the Accreditation of Hospitals sanctioned hospitals because we weren't writing for enough OxyContin. The government told us that OxyContin was a non-addicting drug, and you will get penalties if you don't treat people. The Tennessee State Legislature in 2001, again trying to practice medicine, said that doctors had to treat patients for pain, even if they, in principle, felt that this was wrong. They had, and if you don't treat them with opiates, by law, you have to refer them to a pain clinic. And then the third step of that is that the federal government, and Representative Dunn knows all about this, the federal government more recently, to go to doctors themselves, they came out with a questionnaire. It's called Press Gaining. And one of the questions says, did your doctors give you the pain medicine that you wanted? Are you being treated for your pain? And if you check no, the doctor would get a penalty from the government. And look where it's led us. I have deeply held principles. Now let me back up and say in 2015 we finally repealed that law, which was good. It was fine. We finally got out of that. I have deeply held principles about the death penalty. There's a lot of people right now say that because the death penalty is inhumane, is that physicians should be involved in this. Physicians right now cannot be involved in the death penalty in any way. And they may say the most humane thing to do is let the doctors do this. I have a deeply held principle that I don't want to be involved in any death penalty cases. I could say the same thing now. Now, this is where some physicians are going to have different opinions. I don't believe in physician-assisted suicide. I don't believe that the government, by law, should come to me and say, you have to participate in this. This is the law. You can't turn that patient down. You can't refer that patient to someone else. What the law had that I personally thought that this counselor's law that we were talking about was very reasonable. It said that if a therapist had a deeply held principle where he didn't want to treat a patient for some reason, number one, he didn't have to do it. Number two, by law, he had to arrange an appointment to what he felt was the appropriate person for that patient to go to. And then number three, if it were an emergency, he had to treat it, because therapists may have someone coming in, that are suicidal. By law, they would have to treat that patient until they got over the emergency. So people are talking about, why some of the legislatures have been opposed to this law, this therapist law. This is what we're talking about, is if there's a deeply held principle that therapist has, if he feels it's better to refer that patient to someone else for whatever reason, he has to do it, or he has the option of doing it, unless it's an emergency.
Do any other lawmakers want to chime in on this issue? No.
I think the law, the proposed bill this year is to say that the state will set up their own licensing standards as opposed to automatically taking the federal one.
From that government, from that organization.
Yes,
that's what the law is about this year. This all started, this debate really started last year.
And this organization's not being used nationwide. It's what, Richard, 9 states use it?
I don't know.
It's not every state using this organization's guidelines.
And I feel whether it's pharmacists, physicians, counselors, or whoever, a private outside organization should not be dictating the behavior in Tennessee. Now, what they can do is they can propose rule changes, and it goes through a committee, and it's voted on then by the entire legislature. But to give a private, non-elected body the ability to do that, I think is wrong.
All right, let's go ahead and shift gears to another question from the audience here today. The question is, do any of you believe the open carry handgun bill will reduce gun deaths in Tennessee? Who wants to field this first? Don't all jump at once.
Well, here, I'll jump in. Oh, sorry, Mark, go ahead. I'll let you take it since you volunteered first.
I'll be on the Civil Justice Committee in the coming session, and we'll be dealing with this bill. And I'm always mindful that constitutional rights are not absolute.
Could you speak up just a little bit more loudly, please?
Yes. I am always mindful that constitutional rights, including Second Amendment rights, are not absolute. However, I want to provide, I'm always in favor of expanding or protecting constitutional rights. Now, whether the open carry law will help people defend themselves, I think is the crucial issue. And I'd like to take a look and see what other states, how it's working out in other states, the open carry law, to see if there's any adverse impact there. So I remain undecided on how I'll vote on this issue, but I'm interested in allowing people to defend themselves with a minimal amount of bureaucracy.
Representative Zachary, do you want to chime in as well?
Very similar to what Martin said. I mean, it's based on the question, it's not as much about will this eliminate deaths as much as reinforcing the constitutional principles that we already have in place. And I think from my perspective, I mean, I haven't read the bill or seen the details of the bill, but one thing that's important to remember is that 98% of all mass shootings have occurred in gun-free zones. And so anybody that is proposing a bill, and that's according to the Heritage Foundation, and so anybody that's proposing one of those bills, and I've talked to the gentleman, Micah Van Huss, who's going to be one of the sponsors of those bills, the intent is to begin to eliminate some of those gun-free zones by reinforcing and reinstituting the constitutional rights that we already have in place today.
Any other lawmaker want to chime in?
The majority of the deaths that have taken place across our state have been within the inner city, and mostly with African American youth. This particular bill doesn't really address how these young people are getting their hands on these guns. So I think we need to really look at wholesale gun dealers. Speaking of gun zones, here in Knoxville, East Knoxville is known as a gun-free zone, but yet still Chahowie Park has a gun show at least 3 or 4 times a year, and so that's a contradiction within itself. So there's nothing really addressing or letting us know how young people are getting their hands on these guns to commit these violent crimes. So what we, once again, really need to look at is who's selling the guns to these young people and where are they getting them from? And that's really the question, if that question is really addressing how do we stop so many deaths due to gun violence. You have to look at where the majority of these deaths are taking place.
All right, Representative Staples, thank you. I'm going to move on to another question. This person in the audience has to leave early, so we want to try to get this out here. It says, we are in the midst of a global refugee crisis with over 65 million people forcibly displaced in the world. Governor Haslam recently said he no longer opposes refugee resettlement in the state of Tennessee. Will you change your positions and provide opportunities for refugees to call Tennessee home? Let's go ahead and start with Senator Yeager on this one.
Well, I think that all of us, the question's a little broad, first of all. I think there are some legitimate concerns that are involved with the resettlement refugee question. I think that the legislature will be bringing a lawsuit soon. We've engaged a law firm to assist us on the cost of resettlement to the state of Tennessee, and whether or not the federal government is going by current statute to provide the reimbursement for that cost that we provide. So that is one issue there that is a very important issue to Tennesseans who pay for the bill. And I supported the lawsuit and will. I appreciate Governor Haslam's sentiments, of course, on the issue. But I do think that it is no one is against immigration. Probably many of us in this room, our forebears immigrated here. But it ought to be lawfully, and the state certainly has a role should have a role in that immigration, and hence this lawsuit.
Representative Matlock, would you like to chime in on this as well?
I think you stated that well. The question is not, are we as a state rejecting people? The question came down to, are we as a state allowed to interact with the federal government, who seemed to be at the time to force that upon us? I think each of us has an illustration in our own life, district, family, of someone that we know personally that has been a great member of our society that came in through this method. But I would stand with, I think, most of these legislators in saying that we in Tennessee would like to have a say in how that's done, and what was happening from the federal level was we were being forced to take without really any voice.
Well, and we can see from the resettlement of children who came up from Mexico, the federal government didn't tell us who these children are, where they're located at. I mean, from the state level, that would be great, so we could allocate ESL teachers to certain communities where there's a larger immigrant population. We found out about the children from the Health and Human Resources website. The federal government never contacted the state to say, you have 1,500 children who have been relocated to your state. That's a problem, because even it's the same thing at the federal level with the other immigrants. Like, we just get them, and there's not a good conversation going on between us, who have to provide the resources, and the federal government saying, take them. So that's a problem for us.
The federal government has never been very forthcoming in providing information about the refugees who have been repatriated to Tennessee, despite our requests. And like Representative Kane has said, when I inquired a couple of years ago, when this issue really picked up for data, when I inquired the governor's office, and learned that they depended on the Human Services website to get information.
it's kind of shocked me, and I just think that, and the federal government's inability to contribute the information that we need as a state has contributed to this. And as I said earlier, my earlier answers, I think, resulted in the lawsuit that we're going to bring against the federal government.
Well, let's go ahead and move on to another topic, and this is one that is very close to many people here in the Knoxville area, again, coming from our audience. Can you discuss how to encourage diversity and inclusion in our university when the University of Tennessee, at the University of Tennessee, rather, and that office there has been defunded by all of you? Again, just reading.
Well, I'm going to start out with that because we did not defund the diversity at UT. There was a diverting of the funds to other diversity efforts, and we worked, the Knox County and the area delegation worked with the university on how to look at, to make sure that the funds being used for diversity were being used for the intended use, and that it was used in the wisest manner and the best thing. So basically, the university asked us, we did basically what I call a reset button for 1 year to give them a chance to evaluate all their efforts and to make sure that the diversity funding was being used in the manner that they felt like was getting the best use of their dollars. And so we worked with the university on the legislation that was passed last year.
Anyone else want to chime in on this? I was in Nashville last year, and this was a heated discussion at many points. I know Representative Smith, you were there as well as part of that discussion. What would you like to say about this? Some people say there's a lot of misconceptions about what had happened. Other people, obviously, by that question alone, still feel like it was defunded.
Look at numbers because they tell the truth. You know, over $6 million a year is spent on diversity efforts at UT. The one office we're talking about where we diverted funds to minority scholarships and engineering was $475,000. That tells you all you need to know. We did not take the money. It's still there. It's still being used. But when the UT administration came to us, one of the purposes of diversity was to go into all 95 counties of our state to attract students of all different backgrounds, both socioeconomic spectrums, to the university. There were 6 or 7 counties in our state where we have no students from those counties coming to UT, to any of our colleges in UT, and it's the land-grant university. That's where we recommended they focus, is to go and get those students in our state into college as we continue the drive to 55.
Well, and a lot of those numbers, when we looked at them in the Education Committee, you know, we've gone from like 1% international students to 2%. Okay, we're spending $25 million to do that. You know, you should get a better rate of return. Women had actually gone down and minorities had gone up. Well, that's just trading spaces. I mean, it's really not creating diversity. And I think, you know, Representative Dunn mentioned at one point, I mean, if you look at this panel that's in front of you,
Right.
we look rather homogeneous, but we're incredibly diverse. We really are. Okay. I'll take my case, for example. You see me as a white, middle-aged man, but my mother's Jewish, my father's Catholic, and I'm Baptist. Does that not make diversity? You know, I grew up in Houston, probably one of the most diverse towns you will ever see. We have entire street signs that are in English, in Chinese, in Vietnamese, because those folks, I mean, we have one of the largest gay populations in the country. We have an incredibly large black population, and that's the school I went to. Does that not add to my diversity? But you see me as a white, middle-aged man. That's all you see. But we're so much more than that. And even the Diversity Center, it's how you count people. And in Representative Dunn's example that he gave, he had a woman who says, I'm a lesbian Filipino. She had forgotten all the other benefits that she is, that she's a woman, she's college educated, she's funny, she has black hair. Those are all diversity things. She had forgotten all those things because in her strive to be diverse, she had honed in on 2 things, and that's it.
Representative Staples, do you want to chime in on this? What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I didn't vote on that last year. And so I want to Put that out there right now.
Member with a full beard.
And I'm the only member that has a beard, so we are extremely diverse. In the meeting that we had with the president, I do like what the university is planning to do to tackle the issue of diversity going forward. They realize that they want to be a diverse institution of higher learning, going into the southeastern region, and also looking for guidance and help going into the inner city and keeping talent that we have, such at Austin East High School and their robotics team. University of Tennessee is really trying to work hard to recruit some of those students and keep them here. So there's work being done. Conversations are taking place, and with the University of Tennessee being in my district in particular. Do I have all of UT, Eddie? You got some of it?
I've got a little bit.
Eddie has some of it too. But I plan to really work with him, and I've had some great conversations to make sure that we move forward with this. So when an issue like this comes up again, the community, the taxpayers that pay to keep the doors open at University of Tennessee can feel comfortable.
Let's talk a little bit education, but a little bit different here. I want to talk about school buses and school bus safety. This is obviously a topic that I think everyone in this room has thought a lot about over the last couple of years, with two tragedies, one here in Knox County, one down in Chattanooga just a few months ago. There is a push by some for seatbelts on school buses. Just this week we heard someone come out very adamantly against that, saying it would cause more problems. This is going to be a topic this session likely. Where do you stand on this? Let's go ahead and begin with Representative Ramsey.
I'll be glad to start the conversation. This is not a new issue. I've been in the legislature for 8 years, and each year this issue has come up. And I hate to shock all of you, but I am not an expert, and I don't think any of us are experts on everything. So we go to the source. I have 3 LEAs in my district, and the first place I go when I have a question like this is to them to get their expertise. In this issue, as it's come up in the past, the statistics are mixed as far as the safety of seat belts, and I will allow both sides to come and convince me during the next year if indeed the seat belts are going to provide a margin of safety in balance of how much they're going to cost. Now, what Blount County has done since we encountered these problems in Chattanooga and the one up toward Sevier County, we have installed cameras, 2 cameras on each bus. Already there have been some infractions and some complaints that have been discovered. These are not only to watch the students, but they're to watch the drivers, which I think both of the instances that our moderator referred to are driver instances, driver failures. And so we have installed these. I think it's like $80,000 for our Blount County system alone. We have also put in GPSs. For many, many years, our commercial truck drivers have always had GPS programs on their trucks so that their companies can tell exactly how fast they're going, where they are, and if there's any kind of infractions, any problems, the company knows exactly the truth behind the situation. We have done that. I think it's a rental program, and in Blount County we put that on our buses. It's maybe $30 a month per bus or something like that. So I am open to the people that know about these things, the people that have collected the statistics for years. I'm open to the discussion and the debate that's going to happen, and we'll try to make the best decision, the most effect for our expenditure. And as I say, this is not a new situation.
Representative Smith.
And I'll chime in there because I worked with former Representative Armstrong on the legislation over the last 2 years. And it's not an easy, simple topic, because when you think about it, in Knox County we have buses that primarily run middle school, high school, and those that run elementary. But in a lot of our rural areas, they double up. So how do you design a bus that has a seat belt where you can put 3 elementary kids on the seat and then turn around and put 2 high school students, and the seat belts work for both age groups? The next factor comes into, because the underside of buses are exposed to the elements, how do you go in and do the retrofitting to ensure that in case of a crash, it doesn't bust loose, there isn't damage? How much infrastructure and support has to be done, or do they have to scrap those buses and then buy new buses? And then you get into the scenario of the kindergartner. How do you make sure that the seatbelt is something they can easily remove in case we have an incident like we saw in Blount County this week when a bus catches fire, but it's also safe in case of a rollover. So those are a lot of the things that are going into the discussions that we're having. But then the part that nobody seems to talk about is how do we increase the safety bubble around the buses? Senator Massey and I passed a law last year raising the penalty for bus drivers that are caught texting and driving. But do we need to look at putting more money instead of seatbelts into getting better bus drivers, more qualified bus drivers on our buses to make sure that they're paying attention, that we're getting those higher quality. My dad's a truck driver. He's not allowed to use a cell phone except with a hands-free device. He's not allowed to touch his phone in the 18-wheeler. So those are a lot of things. But then when you look at airplanes, we have black boxes that will tell the NTSB every single thing about that plane in case of an accident. Can we look at something similar to put on buses so we know how fast it was going? Was there failure of a system? Capturing video inside and outside, because a lot of buses, the stop sign is irrelevant to a lot of drivers outside of that school bus. So those are all of the things that we've got to talk about more than just seatbelts. We've got to increase the safety bubble around those school buses.
Senator Yeager.
There's 2 points I'd like to add. First of all, I'm not sure if legislation would be appropriate, but the 2 tragic wrecks in Knoxville and then in Chattanooga both involve contract drivers. Some of our local governments contract their drivers out. Others, the bus driver isn't a direct employee. When you contract your drivers out, you have less control over those, I think, less oversight. And, perhaps our local boards and county commissions would want to look at whether or not the contract driving is the right approach. And the other one is that I'd be very reluctant to see any unfunded mandate put on local governments. The remarks have already, Representative Smith and others have already demonstrated that any approach from any changes could result in millions of dollars of additional expense to your local governments. I personally cannot support any unfunded mandate put on your boards or your commissions. If we're going to do something, then the state's going to have to find the money.
Yeah, the estimate is like around $50 million for the next 7 years to the state and $250 to the locals. So the GPSs do take into consideration the speeding, though, like they did in Blount County, because I have them on my vehicles at Sertoma, and you get notified if anybody speeds or if there's any problems with the vehicle. So that is one area. So we just need to look. It is comprehensive. Senator Briggs and I will serve on the Senate Transportation Committee, and I'm sure we will be having hearings on it.
So many people want to know why it's so hard to find good qualified bus drivers. We even had shortages at the start of the school year. Why is that? And as we're talking about this very issue, is there anything being done to attract better, more qualified drivers to our school system?
That's a better question for the school.
Yeah, it's mainly a local government. The state does provide transportation money, but it's up to the local government to figure out how it's spent. One thing that I think the governor will do in his budget, which he will give the budget address on January 30th, will be to put additional money in for driver training and programs to help the local school boards with the checking on drivers. And that should be in this budget address.
All right, let's go ahead and go to another question from our audience. This one is rather lengthy, but I do need to read the whole thing, so bear with me for a moment here. Millions of tax dollars have been spent to equip law enforcement officers with body cameras to increase transparency of how officers perform in encounters with the public. Body cameras are viewed as protection for all parties, both officers and citizens. Well, now some jurisdictions seek to exempt body camera footage from the State Public Records Act. A compromise position is to release footage only after all legal actions, including appeals, have been exhausted, meaning years after the encounter in some instances. Do you think the General Assembly in this session will enact this new exemption to the Tennessee Public Records Act?
I'll be glad, Senator Yeager and I'll be glad to answer this question.
Are you sure about that?
The senator first. This is a tremendous. This is a large issue, and I know it's something that's very important to you. Senator Yeager and I chair the respective Senate and House committees for state government. We are automatically put on as non-voting members to the advisory committee for open records, or open government, pardon me. Last year we had 3 bills that addressed the body cam evidence, and there are no regulations for it at the moment outside of public records. So anything that happens now and in the past is under our current public records provisions, guidelines. What we did was last year we had the 3 bills. They came from different points of view. One was predominantly interested in protecting law enforcement. The other was predominantly interested in protecting the public as far as what would be done, the regulations that surround body cam evidence. Since we had no consensus, and really the procedure for setting up regulations and guidelines for public records is done through the Comptroller's Office, the Council of Open Records. Now, when I first went on the ACOG organization, I thought council was spelled S-I-L, and it was a group of people, but it's one person. So essentially, when legislation comes through the House and the Senate, it goes to that particular person in the Comptroller's Office, and they refer it to the advisory committee, which Senator Yeager and I sit on. The advisory committee contacts, there are 14 organizations represented. About half of them have to do with media organizations, and so they send in their suggestions, and we kind of go through it and see what's best for the public and at large. Where we stand right now is that the bills are going to be refiled this year. We have started a process to gather input from all 14 members of the advisory committee. That includes your association here. We've compiled all of that information. We're going to make it into a booklet form. When these bills, if they proceed, we're going to make this booklet available to the members of those committees and to the advisory committee, which you will be a part of. And so we're going to try to come to some sort of consensus as far as the body camera evidence is dealt with. The law enforcement is mainly interested in excluding portions, redacting portions of that information that might be outside of evidentiary prospects. The media is interested in making sure that is available to the public. We will have to come to some sort of an agreement, as we did on charging fees last year for public records, which the agreement was that we wouldn't make an agreement. And so it stands where it is now. But the issue is huge, because when you're talking about body camera footage, you're talking about not only law enforcement. There are so many law enforcement agencies, TBI, the Beverage Control Commission. We even have Revenue Services. The IRS has body cameras. So we got body cameras, or we got cameras on drones. We got footage for evidence. Every community, every municipality has drones that does all of their work for surveying. So this is a huge issue. It won't be decided in 1 or 2 bills. but your interests are being represented at the moment.
Senator Yeager, do you want to chime in as well?
I think the representative did a very good job at it. He's done an outstanding job, incidentally, serving as a co-chair on this committee. He's really done most of the work, frankly, and I appreciate that. It's going to be a compromise. I don't know if we can reach that compromise this year. I mean, we'll have it done this year for the reasons that he has set out. There are some legitimate arguments that some of the information on these body cams or collected through the body cameras should be an exception to the rule, but I think that there'll have to be a good reason for that, because wherever possible, we need to make sure that information is available to the public. And there's the divide that we're trying to work our way through. It'll be a compromise issue that we'll get input from everybody on, but I still think we have a lot of work to do on it based on the committee work that he and I've served on. And I don't know if we'll be ready this year.
All right, let's shift gears and talk about something that came out yesterday. There was a letter sent to UT President Joe DiPietro. This was concerning outsourcing. I said I wasn't going to ask you guys to raise your hands concerning anything, but all the lawmakers that signed that letter, could you raise your hands just to give us an idea? Okay. I would like someone to explain to people who may not have had an opportunity to read this letter about outsourcing. Then Senator Briggs, you've just been nominated to explain the letter to everyone. People can find it online. We've posted it on our website, WATE.com. I'm sure the other media outlets have as well. But in summary, tell everyone what's in that letter and why you found it so important to send that.
Two statements that I'd like to make before I even talk about this is that, first of all, this was not intended to be a challenge to the university or Dr. DiPietro or any of the university's administration, and it certainly wasn't meant to be a challenge or an affront to the governor. I think that the governor's plan to try to have government become more efficiency, to be good stewards of the taxpayers' money is very important, and I think all of us support that. But what the letter nevertheless intended to do was to point out to Dr. DiPietro that there's several issues that are, that are in play here. One of those, and this is what Governor Haslam's even talking about, is what's the most efficient way to run government and to save money and to approach the problem at the university. And just like government, the best government is the government that's closest to the people. I think the best business decisions are those that are made by the people closest to the business being run. We gave the example in the letter of when there's certain events, such as athletic events or conferences or other things that are occurring at the University of Tennessee, rather than trying to cover all of this in a contract or in a budget or in contract amendments, is that the administrators there should have the opportunity, in the interest of the government and to save money, to have the right person at the right place at the right time to most efficiently take care of that. Also, there can be special issues, particularly at a university, to come up. For example, they're getting ready to build a $100 million plus engineering building at the University of Tennessee that's going to have a linear accelerator. I think the best business practice is for the university, who knows what the particular needs are, to have those people that will be maintaining that linear accelerator to be able to decide who those people are, rather than a company in Chicago. We have a lot of expertise up at Oak Ridge, and the university may decide we do want to outsource part of that. We do want to have some company at Oak Ridge to come in and maintain the area around that linear accelerator. That is a good business practice. If they do outsource certain areas, the university can say this is not working without having to go back and renegotiate a very complex statewide contract. The second issue deals with the workers at the University of Tennessee, and we reminded everyone in the letter that every member of this General Assembly has constituents that work for the Tennessee state government in some form or fashion, and that we're all watching this with a lot of interest. The people that work at the university obviously have, in spite of assurances, and Governor has given assurances that these people will be looked after, but some of these assurances that they have a job may be a difference between driving a few blocks or a mile or two down the road to go to work at the University of Tennessee. They may have to drive 50 miles in order to keep their job. And so you also, even though materially they may or may not lose out, also psychologically that uncertainty is there. And then finally, you have the idea that the people that work for the University of Tennessee, it's a very special institution. There's a lot of loyalty that people have just by working there. Once you outsource, those people's loyalty are going to go to whoever the big company is that has the contract, or the subcontractor that has the contract. It'll no longer be at the university. And the very last part that we mentioned is we wanted to be certain, because Governor Haslam has said publicly, and he means it. Like I said, this is not a confrontational letter to the governor. He said that if the university examines every aspect of this and feels that is not right for the university, they'll have the ability to opt out. We wanted the UT administration, Dr. DiPietro, and our new chancellor, Dr. Davenport, to know that there's going to be members of the General Assembly that will stand by them with their decision, and they're not going to be left out there alone where they may feel that there's pressures to do otherwise.
All right, let's move on to another question that we have from our audience. Someone wants to know, were any of you at Muslim Day at the Capitol yesterday? And if so, what was your experience?
Didn't know that happened.
Yeah, I didn't know that we went out of session at noon on Thursday, and I was down here. I
had planned to be at Briceville Elementary a couple of weeks ago for a reading program. Because of the snow, we couldn't make it, so I did go up there for the reading program. They rescheduled it.
The good thing about our state legislature is we're in Knoxville, or in our hometowns, a whole lot more than we're in Nashville. So we stay closer to the folks that we represent.
All right, here's another question from the audience. If the state should not tell doctors how to treat their patients, why does Tennessee impose a waiting period and pass laws that reduce women's access to reproductive health care?
Well, I think that, the state should minimize the ability, or the laws that it passes dealing with professions. I certainly agree in part with Dr. Briggs on that, but I do feel that there are certain standards that the state needs to address, licensure, health and safety standards, and I think this is where the Supreme Court came down, that certain issues that deal with health and safety are appropriately addressed by the state.
Anyone else want to address that?
I will, and this is one of those probably people would say stay away from, but I will address it. And I'm going to try to give a balanced view on that. I think we had a 48-hour waiting period is what we passed 2 years ago on this. And I don't think that's unreasonable. The decision, from what I've been told for a woman, and I believe it, the decision is a very difficult decision to have an abortion. And what we wanted to try to avoid on that decision is the first thing that a woman's going to think, if it's really an unwanted pregnancy, I want an abortion. And we hear from many women that after sleeping on it and a little bit of consideration, they probably need to wait. 48 hours is not unreasonable. There's not a whole lot of surgery that we even do on people, particularly something major. Elective surgery, something that's not an emergency, that we don't have to postpone the procedure for 48 hours just for scheduling reasons. And we can argue about this, but to me, this is really a big decision. We're taking a life. We can argue about that, but it's pretty big. It's a little bit different than getting a tooth filled. And we do allow in this state, we do allow abortions to occur. We're trying to make it in as safe an environment as possible for the woman, but it is still a big decision that I think shouldn't be made rationally. And people do have a right to an abortion in this state, and there can be other things made. But I think a 48-hour period of reflection and consideration is that some women will say later, I'm glad that I had a little time to think about it. But as a man, I hate even commenting on it, because as a principal, I don't like to comment on things that maybe I don't completely understand.
Representative Zachary.
Sure, and I think ultimately, when you're specifically to Tennessee with the legislature that we have in place now, you're looking at a pro-life legislature. And so I think for the majority of us that serve in Tennessee, it's protecting the sanctity of life. And so it's different for every state, but for us, any step that we can take, I know most of us and the guys I'm sitting around right now have that 100% pro-life rating. Any steps that we can take to protect the sanctity of life, those are steps that we're going to take.
All right, and I do want to remind our audience as we continue on with the conversation, if you're hearing things that you do want to comment, well, you guys are being wonderful about not jumping up and voicing them, but you have those cards, write your questions, they'll get up to me and we'll continue the conversation on a particular topic if I do get those questions. I also want to go back to something Representative Dunn, something from this week. Sorry, you thought you were going to escape. You're not. I know you've been pretty vocal about wanting to repeal the Recess or Physical Education Act that was passed last year. Explain that to everyone and what you see as a possible solution if you do have one as well.
Right, and there's a distinction between recess and physical education. My bill would not affect physical education, which is sort of seen as a class within it. What was passed dealt more with recess, unstructured physical activity or play. And it was so exact as in the early grades there will be 3 15-minute periods for each child during the day to have unstructured physical activity. And when I was principal for the day, I found out it is very hard to work that into the school schedule because different children are at different places at different times. And so how do you get each child to have that? And so I listened to the teachers and the principals, and so I think the best approach is, I know we've heard a lot about repeal and replace at the federal level. Well, this is a true case where I think the first step needs to be repeal it as soon as possible so that the schools can start working their own, and then if their own schedule, and then if someone wants to come back behind it and replace it with something that actually works where they talk to the educators, then I think that would happen. But it was very well intentioned. I think everybody would agree, children need to get up occasionally and move about and burn off energy, but it was so exact in what it demanded of the schools that it's just not working.
Another question from our audience concerning education. There is a proposal to grade schools using an A through F grading system. This type of grading system does not really give any real information about a school areas of excellence or areas in need of improvement. Where does this proposal stand right now?
If I'm not mistaken, that went through the Education Committee last year and it was passed. So that what you're seeing is a result of the language that laws that have already been enacted. And the purpose was there is the A through F, but there's also a lot more information on the school as it relates to proficiency. Where students are doing well, what grades are doing, listed for that school as part of that. But it's hard for most people to just dig through all of that. They want to know when they're looking at a community, where does this school stand? And that was the genesis behind that original legislation.
All right, another question from the audience here, again a little bit lengthy. It says, I'm here regarding the bill proposed by Sheila Butts regarding junk food, sweets, and fats in foods. Is this another way of shaming recipients without proposing a bill to increase minimum wage so that people are not dependent? Assuming talking about food stamps here as well. I'm not as familiar with this. Does anyone want to address this?
I spoke with Sheila for just a quick second this week about that, and I actually concur with her. I think because those dollars flow, we have a responsibility to see what happens with those dollars. And I think we, along with that, have the possibilities. If we have information that says eating correctly, your health is important, I think we in the government, because we have the funding, have the right to dictate to some extent what you can buy. And I would support that entirely.
May a lawmaker agree with that or want to chime in on that?
Well, I mean, I know it might make, and I'm not as familiar with the bill, I haven't seen it, but it could be similar to the WIC funding that can be used for, women with young children with, for milk and bread and the basics, the milk, things that you really need to stay healthy. So it could be very similar to that. I know we do have a tremendous health problem in Tennessee as far as obesity. Back in the 90s, the best state in the country had only, the worst state in the country had about 20% obesity rate. Now, the best state has 20%, in Tennessee, along with several other states, is up about a third of our adults are obese, are morbidly obese. So we have to look at different areas, and like I say, I haven't seen the bill, I don't know, but we do need to be doing a better job to try to get our population healthier.
All right, I'm getting a few more questions here. I also just received notice that we need to wrap up by 1:05, so we only have about 6 or 7 minutes left, everyone.
Chris,
Yes.
let me just say this real quick because I know we're going to be ending soon. If you have a question you didn't get answered to any one of these, we're going a lot of us will be able to hang around for a few minutes. So grab us and ask that question if you don't get it asked at the podium.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful thing to kind of point out here. Our lawmakers do make themselves very accessible, and I'm sure there are a lot of you who have follow-up questions. Be sure to reach out to them. They're here today because they want to answer your questions and continue the discussion. So something to think about here. This is kind of a follow-up to what we were just talking about with healthy foods. Someone wanting to know, are you looking at what is being provided in public schools? It's not a very healthy menu.
Education people.
Well, I actually brought a bill 2 years ago that would allow the local school board, if they wanted to opt out of the federal requirement for schools to provide better lunch, they could find that money locally. They can do that. So that option's out there, but it will cost more money on the local level because we do receive money from the federal government, and with that comes strings, and we have to abide by those or they lose the federal funding. So this is a bill, that's out there. I believe Germantown right now is the only school system using it that has decided to find the funding locally so that they can provide better meal choices so that students will eat them. Because a lot of kids, a lot of the stuff ends up in the trash, and we've seen that even here in Knox County.
I just want to respond to that, to the previous question regarding the bill, and I hadn't seen it or read it, and I don't like to, because I hear something I don't agree with, I don't like to make knee-jerk reactions, just to be talking. But just to that point, exactly with the schools, if we're going to attack certain issues, especially with choices, or I don't like the terminology of any government body dictating anything to the people that elected them. You're their servant, so you need to listen and react to that with wisdom. But having said that, we have a lot of rural areas and inner city areas that don't have healthy choices for foods, that are food deserts. And so if we're going to look at addressing bills, if we have concerns about food stamps and where that money is going, we don't know if that individual is trying to make a birthday cake or maybe a diabetic. So once again, you have to look at the minute things that should be common sense before you make decisions. And if you're going to attack something, you're concerned about health, look at those individuals that live in food deserts. Let's address that. Let's also look at our schools with that question. We're talking about our future. We're talking about our children. Unfortunately, when we do talk about that, you hear a lot about money and numbers, and we forget we're talking about our babies and our future. So if you're really concerned about education, if you're really concerned about having a healthy community, let's look at our schools and look at the food choices we're giving our children first. And I know that's a late reaction, but it just didn't sit right in my holster. So I had to react to that.
This kind of goes in line with what we were talking about just a moment ago about not all the questions being able to get answered today. And someone does want to know, how do you all actively engage with all of your constituents, not just the ones who are the loudest or the most vocal? And maybe I'll follow up on that saying, what is the best way for them to reach out to you? If they don't get a chance to talk to you here today, email, phone call, snail mail, what's the best?
I meet people at the grocery store.
Yeah.
It's really every way. I mean, we are out amongst our community. Randy comes and talks to me at church. You're at everything. I mean, in everywhere you go, you talk to a different group of people. Whether it's when I'm at work, I have my staff come in and talk to me about issues. So it's everything and all and above. I mean, people come meet with you. They set up meetings. People come to Nashville, email, call. So everything works together. But I think this whole delegation works very hard to be at everything, to show up, to be accessible. and to respond to, the communications from the people in Knox County and the surrounding counties in East Tennessee.
And following up with what Becky's saying, send an original email, and on some controversial bills. There was one last year, I can tell you, that I got 1,200 emails that was all the same email that came out from a server that just fired them off. And I missed several emails because they just got buried in all of that. You can imagine trying to go through that. So if you don't send an email, but then if you don't hear back from us in a day or so, either call the office or send another email, because it honestly may have just gotten caught up in that tidal wave as we go through. You can imagine just different things that we've dealt with over the last 2 years, just the times that would have happened. So, send us an email, let us know your thoughts, and if you don't hear back, follow back up, try and get in touch with us, especially if you see there's, watch the newspaper and the news, you'll know if there's something controversial that's going on that's probably lighting up our email accounts.
Okay, we only have 2 minutes. I have one last question I want to get in, and I'm going to start with Representative Daniel, because I feel like you're way down there, and you haven't had too many questions down there. Someone wants to know, what are your thoughts on term limits for state representatives and senators?
I support them. I think it'd be fine. The problem is to make them consistent. So if we enacted a term limit for representatives of, say, 6 terms, they would need to make that consistent with senators to make it so it would be 4-year terms for senators. But I personally support it.
And I think on the state level, it's not as important as it is on the federal level, because we do have high turnover on the state level to a certain extent. And so on the federal level, I completely support term limits, and I wouldn't be opposed on the state level, but I think the turnover is much higher. I mean, I've only been a year and a half, and we have, 16 new members? So I don't think it's as important on the state level.
All right. Unfortunately, everyone, we are out of time, but let's go ahead and give all of our lawmakers a big round of applause today. We know you guys are busy. The session is back underway, and we will be keeping a close eye on all of these issues. Again, thank you so much, and everyone enjoy the rest of your weekend.